Well, I wonder if you ever feel like you're doing everything you can. You're doing everything you can, but something is still missing. It could be that you're flat out working, so busy working to provide for your family that you don't have any time to spend with your family. Maybe that's a situation you find yourself in. Or perhaps you've studied hard at uni. You've done well in all of your assessments. You've completed all the extra requirements. You even took some summer classes and you worked for free just so you could get some experience to put on your resume. But actually, you're not even sure this is what God wants you to do with your life. Or maybe you've climbed the ladder at work. You've won some awards. You've earned a great income. You take spectacular holidays. But you lay awake at night thinking, there's got to be something more. What am I missing? And that ache we feel, like something's missing, it may well be God calling us to slow down and to listen. Because we live in this culture which says, do more, achieve more, be more. And life often feels like a race, doesn't it? A race with no finish line. You think you get to the finish line and you think, oh, I'm still not satisfied. There's no finish line with work. There's all these school runs you've got to do. There's housework. There's babysitting. There's the mountain of emails. There's always something. And even in church, we do this. We can often feel worn out, frustrated, and even guilty. We serve faithfully. We run hard. But there are times when we catch ourselves saying, well, what's it all for? And you'll know this is you when time with Jesus becomes something you try to squeeze into your schedule. Instead of seeing your relationship with Jesus as your number one priority, and everything else comes second and fits around it and fits around him. And we often find ourselves with this tension, don't we, where we want to put God first, but life just keeps getting in the way. But what if doing more and being more, what if that's not what God has in mind for you? What if the Lord has a different priority for you? Well, the good news is we actually know what Jesus thinks about our priorities, because Luke took the time to record what Jesus thinks our priorities should be. And in this passage that Liz has just read from us, it comes from Luke chapter 10. And in Luke 10, the whole chapter talks about what our priorities need to be as God's children. So just before this section that Liz has read, we find out a scholar comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus, what is the way to eternal life? In other words, what's the most important thing I need to be focused on? And Jesus essentially says, well, what do you think? And the scholar comes back and gives a great response. He actually repeats the great commandment. In Luke 10:27, he says, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. And Jesus says, well, go and do that. That sounds like, well, two great priorities. Love God, number one. Love your neighbour, number two. The two most important priorities we can have. And Jesus agrees. Love God, love your neighbour. Now, immediately after that conversation, again in Luke 10, Luke records for us two events that help us understand how to do that, how to love God and how to love our neighbour. And the first event is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells us the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in that story, we learn who our neighbour is and how we're supposed to love them. And the very next event that Luke records is the passage we're looking at today. It's the record of Jesus' visit to Martha's house. The parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us how to love our neighbour, and the events that unfolded in Martha's house that day, they teach us how to love God, how to prioritise our relationship with God. You see, in those times when we're flat out doing everything we can, but we still feel like something's missing, what that reveals is that we've misunderstood how to love God. And what we learn from Jesus' interaction with Martha is that when we prioritise time with him, the door is flung open wide to all the blessings of being in a deeply connected relationship with Jesus. Blessings like security and belonging. Blessings like a life of peace, a life of meaningfulness and fruitfulness, a life of clarity and purpose. And I want to come back to those things in a few moments. But friends, when we prioritise Jesus and time with Jesus, it zooms us into a whole new level of living. And that's what we learn here in this chapter. And so we're at Martha's house. I want you to picture this. Imagine you're Martha, and the most important influencer of your day has just shown up at your house. The person who has everyone's attention. This person has shown up at your house, and he has an entourage of at least 12 people, possibly more. And here's what that looked like for Martha in Luke 10. Martha opened her home to him, and she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Imagine if the most important influencer in the world turned up to your house. You'd be busy making sure the place was clean, make sure that everyone was fed, watered. I wonder if you've ever invited a bunch of friends over to your house. And I'm sure you have, but invited a bunch of friends over, and you've made sure there's food prepared. You've been busy serving people food, make sure everyone's got a drink, that they're comfortable, there's enough chairs, that people are chatting and feel welcome in your home. And after everyone goes home, you think to yourself, what was all that about? I never had a chance to talk to anyone. I was so busy serving food and cleaning up and loading the dishwasher or actually washing the dishes. I didn't have a chance to talk to anyone. And that's what Martha was facing that day. She was so busy that she didn't have capacity to enjoy her friendship with Jesus or to benefit from what he was teaching everyone else at her house that day. And so one of the most important lessons from this passage is that not spending time with Jesus is the biggest mistake you can make in your life. Now, it's not that what Martha was doing was wrong. She was actually doing a good thing. She was serving and caring for the people in her home. Hospitality actually matters. The Bible tells us that. Serving people is a good thing to do. But when service becomes a substitute for relationship, especially our relationship with Jesus, then we've made a huge mistake. So Jesus isn't rebuking Martha's service here. You see that as you read through. He doesn't rebuke her for serving. He's redirecting her priorities. He's telling her that she's got her priorities wrong. It's not that serving is not important. It's that it's not the first thing. And so Jesus didn't go to Martha's house to be fed. He was there to feed the souls of those who'd gathered there, including Martha's soul. And Martha made the mistake of not prioritising that time. She was out of sync with what Jesus was actually doing. She was so focused on what she wanted to do for Jesus that she didn't notice what Jesus was actually doing in the moment. She missed it. And then on the other hand, there's while Martha was frantically trying to serve, there's Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. She wasn't running around. She was resting. She wasn't distracted. She was devoted. Mary's priorities were different. We're told in verse 39, Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. She realised that while there was loads of really good things that she could be doing, the one thing that was more important than anything else was to listen to Jesus. Mary prioritized presence over performance. She prioritized proximity to Jesus over productivity for Jesus. She wasn't trying to impress Jesus. She was just trying to be with him. And it might appear to us at first glance that Mary's lazy. Why wasn't she helping Martha? Was she just being unhelpful? Well, if we believe that, we would be mistaken. You see, in Jewish culture, to sit at someone's feet was a posture of learning. To sit at someone's feet was the posture of a disciple. Rabbis expected this from their students. It was a posture of someone who was ready and prepared to learn. And so Mary was in fact busy. Not busy in the same way that Martha was. She was busy learning from Jesus. Mary wasn't being lazy, she was being intentional. She was hungry and ready to learn from Jesus, to hear his voice, to soak in what he had to say. Mary was prioritizing Jesus and his wisdom. She had an open Bible, she had an open heart, she had an open mind, and she was prioritizing the presence of Jesus over her own performance and productivity. And this is what Jesus said about her in verse 42. Mary has chosen what's better, and it will not be taken away from her. She's chosen the better thing. Again, it's not that what Martha was doing was wrong, it's just that what Mary had chosen was the better thing. And when you choose time with Jesus, you're never wasting your time. You're investing in the only thing that cannot be taken away from you. Time with Jesus is never a waste of time. It anchors your soul, it aligns your heart, it fills your spirit. It develops our awareness of his presence. And Jesus says that your relationship with him in that time and what comes out of that relationship with him can't be taken away. You know, Martha's there preparing a meal, and while that's important, it's gone once it's done. But when we feed on the presence of Jesus, what comes out of that time is eternal. It lasts. And so here's the life hack that we're meant to take away from this. Jesus wants us to prioritize being in his presence before we turn our attention to productivity. Our priority is the presence of Jesus before productivity. And we have a very busy week ahead of us. With 160 kids and all their families coming into our building, we're all going to be very busy with that, preparing for that and running that program. But don't forget this. Our priority is the presence of Jesus. Let's be in the presence of Jesus first before we go into that time of productivity. Let's start our day in the presence of Jesus first, because what comes out of that time lasts. Prioritize his presence before we turn our attention to productivity. See, some people believe that Jesus' primary love language is acts of service, whereas actually his primary love language is quality time. He wants time with you. Jesus doesn't measure our love for him by our activity, he measures it by our intimacy, how well we know him. That's the life hack that Martha missed and Mary understood. That's what it all comes down to. Jesus wants us to prioritize being in his presence before we turn our attention to productivity. It's not that productivity is bad, it's just that it's not our first priority. Our first priority is to be in the presence of Jesus. Productivity is about output, but presence is about relationship. And Jesus is far more interested in his relationship with you and your relationship to him than he is for what you can do for him. And when we get this right, that's when our world begins to change. The door is flung open wide to the goodness of God in our lives. And we experience those things, like I said before, like security and belonging, and a sense of peace, and a sense of meaningfulness and fruitfulness in our lives, and clarity and purpose. When we prioritize time with Jesus over everything else, we discover a deeper connection with God and with others. You want to connect with the kids and families that are coming into our church this week? We must spend time in Jesus' presence first. Perhaps we experience a connection that we've never known before, like Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. When we spend time in Jesus' presence, we learn that presence, that proximity to Jesus matters more than our performance. The more time we spend with Jesus, the more we become like Jesus. We listen better. We notice people who we used to overlook. We don't just love God, we begin to love others. We shift from reacting to life to responding to life with love, grace, mercy. And that's when our relationships begin to change, because we've been in the presence of Jesus, and it's changed us. And ultimately, Jesus prepares us, being in the presence of Jesus prepares us to be Jesus in the world, to be Jesus to the people around us. And that's the kind of Jesus-infused service that transforms lives. You want to transform the lives of the kids and families who are coming in to our church this week, then be in the presence of Jesus. When we prioritize time with Jesus over everything else, it reduces our stress and our anxiety. Again, look at what Martha says. In verse 40, she said to Jesus, "Don't you care?" And maybe you've said that to Jesus from time to time. You're so flat out making sure that you're doing all these good things and serving people, whether it's your family or in church or wherever it is, and you say to the Lord, "Don't you care? Can't you see how overwhelmed I am?" Again, don't forget that Martha's not doing anything wrong here. She was serving people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Martha's problem was that her soul was stretched way too thin. And that's what Jesus was concerned about. Jesus did care, but not about Martha's preparations. He cared about her presence with him. He cared about her soul before her service. Her service was important. He appreciated it, I'm sure. But he was much more concerned about her soul. Again, don't forget, Jesus did not rebuke Martha for her service that day, but he was addressing the stress that she was experiencing. We see it in verses 41 and 42. He said, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things." You're stressed. You're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Jesus was gently calling Martha out of the chaos of her life and the pressure and the stress of her life and into the peace of his presence. He wants to give you the peace that comes from being in his presence. Because peace doesn't come from getting everything done, does it? I mean, I work with a to-do list. I don't know how you operate, but if I get through my to-do list in a day, that's a miracle. But if you do tick off everything in your to-do list, fantastic. But you know what comes tomorrow? Another to-do list. Peace doesn't come from getting everything done. Peace comes from being in the presence of Jesus. And so I don't know what it might be that's standing between you and time with Jesus. But whatever it is, if Jesus didn't give it to you and put it in your hand, if he didn't give it to you, then it's time to put it down. A third thing we learn here is that when we prioritize time with Jesus over everything else, we live more meaningful and fruitful lives. Again, look at how Jesus describes Mary in verse 42. "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." She's chosen the better. It's not that what Mary was doing wasn't good, but what Mary was doing was better. Friends, when we prioritize being with Jesus, the fruit that flows out of that time, it lasts. Why does it last? Because it comes out of a place of dependence on Jesus Christ and not out of our own striving and our own strength. We've got to remember that, don't we? Again, as we serve this week, or as we serve our families, or as we serve the Lord anywhere, we've got to remember that whatever comes out of a dependence on Christ is far more valuable and lasting than what comes out of our own strength. Jesus said in John 15, "Those who remain in me and I in them will bear much fruit." And he goes on to say, fruit that will last. It's a kind of fruit that doesn't go off. It's the kind of fruit that's always in season, the fruit that comes out of being in the presence of Jesus. When we live lives connected to Jesus who is the vine, we don't just get more done, we actually produce better fruit. And God grows it, He sustains it, and He uses that fruit far beyond anything we could imagine. Because what's born out of our time with Jesus, He tells us, can't be taken away. He said it to Mary, and He's reminding us today that whatever comes out of that time spent with Him cannot be taken away. And finally, when we prioritize time with Jesus over everything else, our load becomes lighter and our lives become less cluttered. Take another look at Martha. In verses 41 and 42, Jesus says, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one." She was worried about many things, but Jesus says only one thing. Jesus is the ultimate minimalist. You're worried about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one thing is needed. Martha was worried and upset about many things. She wasn't doing bad things. It's just that she was doing too many things. Maybe that sounds familiar to you. We live in a world that applauds striving and busyness. How's life? Oh, busy. We all say it, don't we? And multitasking. In fact, the big deal today, if you want to get ahead, apparently, is to have a side hustle. Like you have your regular job, 38, 40 hours a week plus, and then you have a little side hustle so you can become a millionaire selling things on eBay or whatever it is. I've got to tell you, I've got enough to do in my job, let alone focus on a side hustle. Maybe you've got a little side hustle going, but the question is, do you have time to invest in your relationship with Jesus? Jesus invites us into a life of simplicity and focus. When we spend time with Him first, everything else, all other priorities get filtered through what actually matters in life. Jesus is not interested in you doing more. He's interested in you doing what matters the most. Paul said in Romans 12, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that renewal starts when we get into Jesus' presence. Because when we know what Jesus is calling us to do, then we can let go of everything else. We can let go of what He's not calling us to do. And that lightens our load. It simplifies life. Martha was worried and upset about many things, but Jesus said that there's really only one thing that's needed. And that one thing is to stay close to Him. A simple life, fewer distractions, clearer priorities, a soul that's at rest. That's the gift of doing what matters most, of doing the better thing and prioritizing the presence of Jesus. And so, as we reflect on this passage today, maybe you've been living like Martha. Jesus is calling us to make the choices of Mary. You might live like Martha, but in this passage, Jesus is saying, no, make the same choice as Mary. So then the question is, well, how do we get there? How do we do that? How can we ensure that our priorities are in the order that Jesus wants? His presence first and our productivity second. Well, I think Mary's posture tells us something about this. We need to start our day at the feet of Jesus. I don't think it's anything you haven't heard before. We've got to start our day at the feet of Jesus. Before you check your phone, check in with the Lord. It's not about having a long and perfect quiet time. It's about starting your day with the right posture, a posture of listening to Jesus, a posture of learning from your Lord, a posture of not just rushing into the day thoughtlessly, but taking the time to be in the presence of Jesus. And throughout the day, we can also interrupt the urgent with connection. When life gets too busy or too loud, we can choose to pause and to listen and to connect again with Jesus. Life won't slow down on its own. We have to be intentional about that. We can choose to stop. We can choose to breathe. We can choose to recenter. We can choose to pray and take 5 minutes in the middle of all the chaos to pray and to worship and say something simple like, Jesus, I'm here and I know you are too. Show me where you're at work. We can also ask good questions. We can every day ask things like, am I being driven down by stress or am I being led forward by the Spirit? Because being driven down by stress leads to burnout. Being led forward by the Spirit leads to lasting fruit. Mary chose to trade pressure for the presence of Jesus. And Jesus said that that would not be taken from her. It was the better thing, and it wouldn't be taken from her. Friends, you won't regret the time you spend with Jesus because everything worthwhile flows out of it. Jesus said only one thing matters: closeness to Him, knowing Him. It's the one thing that changes everything. It's why Jesus praises presence with Him first before productivity. So again, remember, Jesus wasn't asking Mary to stop serving. He was inviting her to stop striving. She was distracted by many things, but only one thing was essential. And that one thing was to prioritize the presence of Jesus. Because real rest isn't found in doing more for Jesus. It's found in trusting what Jesus has already done for us. And so maybe like Martha, you've been busy doing all the right things. They're all good things, all right things, trying your best to keep everything together, trying your best to be good enough. But deep down, you're tired. You're restless. You're wondering if you're missing the point. You're wondering why life is so hard. Or maybe the thing that's missing for you then is not something else you need to do, but someone else you need to stop and get to know. That someone, of course, is Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Friends, Jesus doesn't want something from you. He wants a relationship with you. And that's why He came. It's why He died. It's why He rose again, so that He could have a relationship with you, so that you could know Him, that you could know His power in your life. He's not asking you to work harder for Him. He's not asking for you to lift your game, perform better. He's simply inviting you to trust Him, to sit at His feet as Mary did and say, Jesus, I want to know you more. So friends, you don't have to strive to earn Jesus' love and approval. He's holding it out to you. We just have to receive it, and we do that simply by saying yes to Him, giving Him our attention, giving Him presence, our presence, enjoying His presence. It's saying yes to Him.